Let's go NFC South. Carolina Panthers. I think they're one of the more fascinating teams as well because they had a ton of money to spend. They were in on Milton Williams. So they come away with Tershawn Wharton, 3 years, over $54 million. Trevon Moehrig, 3 years, $51 million. They kicked it all off with Jaycee Horn, 4 years, $100 million, being re-signed. So massive investment on the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Jones, the second on the edge, 2 years, up to $20 million. Bobby Brown, the third, 3 years, $21 million. Rico Dowdle at running back for 1 year, $3 million. Good job. Dr. Eager got his one signing in there, a $3 million running back. Good to see that in there. And then Michael Jackson at corner. They got some pretty good play out of him. 2 years, $14.5 million coming back. A few other moves in there as well. What'd you make of the Panthers haul here?
Yeah, when you factor in that the kind of defensive moves in free agency were Plan B, Plan A was Milton Williams. The reports were that they were in on him. They thought they had a deal done with him at one point, and then the Patriots basically just went, like, we're not going to be denied on Milton Williams. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep raising the paddle in the auction until we win the thing. When you factor that in, I think pivoting, drawing a line in the sand and saying this is the financial number we're not willing to go beyond, and then getting in Tershawn Wharton, getting in Patrick Jones, getting in Bobby Brown, the third. I think that's a pretty good backup option. Like I think that demonstrates pretty sound process, right? To say, look, good as Milton Williams is, let's maintain value. This is what this is worth. This is what we're willing to pay. This is the line at which we're not willing to bid higher in the auction, and then pivot, take that money and spend it on Tershawn Wharton, who's been a really good rotational pass rushing, disruptive player for the Chiefs over the last few years. Patrick Jones, they've upgraded that defensive line with that spending. I think that's a pretty good process.
I'm fascinated to see it happen. By the way, I think had misinformation on the Dowdle contract. I think he's over $6 million for 1 year. Either way, with inflation, pretty solid running back deal there for a guy that was productive last year for the Cowboys. Panthers defensive line, they had massive needs anyway. I think they're still drafting one of the best defensive linemen in the draft at 8. So you add that guy to the mix. It's all right. I think it's all right. I can't wait to see what this looks like. Tershawn Wharton still, as he had some great games. I know Chiefs fans probably love him, but as a compliment to Chris Jones and Karlaftis and Amenahue, he was fine. It's just everyone where I'm lukewarm. It is defensive tackles who I think are making more than they're worth. And so that's what the market is. I get it. The scarcity, I get it. But Tershawn Wharton, Bobby Brown, and Pat Jones, like they're all the 5th best defensive linemen on their respective teams last year. And those guys are combined to make a ton of money here. So I'll be interested to see how that works. They got Derek Brown coming back off of injury. If you do add, like if Mason Graham falls, it's probably not a Mason Graham at this point with the defensive tackles that they have here, but name your favorite edge, Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, James Pierce, Mike Green, whoever it is at 8 for the Panthers. You add that guy to the mix with Jadeveon Clowney. And, it's a much deeper rotation than it was last year, but they had to pay. They had to pay for it and pay for Jaycee Horn and pay for Trevon Moehrig. So there's a lot of investment on the defensive side of the ball for a team that had one of the worst defenses last year. So something had to give here.
The Jaycee Horn one is really interesting. Like at his best, I think he's worth that money, but he's really low on sample size of being at his best at that level between injuries and just the volatility at cornerback. And, who knows how much the injuries had a residual effect once he was back on the field. But like they're basically paying him. I mean, he's paid as the highest paid corner in the NFL, right? He and Patrick Surtain, who were the sort of 2-star corners of that draft class. And, some people liked Horn, some people liked Surtain. They got effectively the same contract. Actually, Horn got more than Surtain. Like based off their careers so far, that's crazy. I mean, there's no justification for Jaycee Horn to have more money than Patrick Surtain based off their current, based off the resume that each one of them has in the NFL.
No, I agree. I mean, it's a defense of a bunch of players making probably more than you would expect. And that's just where the Panthers are right now, and the needs that they had on the defensive side of the ball. So the only reason why we've been calling it a plan B, and I compared it to the Moneyball line where they say we'll replace Giambi in the aggregate, is because the Panthers thought they had the deal for Milton Williams, right? They were right there for Milton Williams, presumably at $24-25 million a year, and they end up at about $35 million for 3 players, right? With Wharton, Patrick Jones, Bobby Brown. And so rolling 7 and 8 deep is important on the defensive line, and that's what they're doing. But these guys are like low to high end rotational players historically. That's what they are.
What would you, so GM Steve, which would you prefer if you were given those 3 guys for 35-ish million a year, or Milton Williams for 26, let's say 26 and a hair to get above New England? Which would you have preferred?
I'd probably go Milton Williams. I'd probably want that. And then I would be in on Zarique on the cheap, and I would be in on the cheaper options elsewhere at defensive tackle to offset that. That's what I would prefer. And look, I don't love any of these guys at the price, but Milton Williams, I think that level of upside at his age would be the number one plan. I think that was what Carolina's number one plan was, because I don't think they're signing. They might sign Bobby Brown for his 3 years, $21 million. I would say Tershawn Wharton and Pat Jones are, those are the 2 that probably equal Milton Williams. But you can almost put all 3 in there.
Well, this is the fascinating kind of discussion around free agency. Like it's great to sort of say, this is player X, these are the targets we want, and this is the amount we want to pay for them. And then you have the market factors, like this is how much they're actually gonna, like, it's when you get in the auction, right? Like how much is what's really interesting, I think, is because each player is one of one, right? And then even within broadening it to similar players, like players that are of a same type, it's a small market, right? So it is very much like an auction, like an antique auction or a car auction or whatever. You're like, well, theoretically, this car, this vintage Jag E-Type is worth this amount of money, right? But there's only 25 of these things left in the world. This is the first one that's come up for auction in X number of years. Like, to what extent is it, I want this car, even if I have to overpay for it, right? And okay, the difference being we're in a closed system with the salary cap, right? So everything, like every amount above the amount you think it's worth is taking away from something else, which is not the case for a classic car auction. I mean, if you've got the money, you've got the money. Who cares how much it's costing? But it does create this interesting dynamic where I do wonder at what point you should just be overpaying for the guys you think are the difference makers, and then using the amount you overpay to affect like the rest of your budget, right? So you want to pay $24 million a year for Milton Williams. Crap, the Patriots are being a pain in the ass. They want him as well. So you've got to go to 26.5, right? But if you go to 26.5, you get Milton Williams, and then you go, well, okay, that's now $2.5 million less a year that we have to play with for the rest of the pool. Just like that's the readjustment that you should make, as opposed to, drawing this sort of firm line in the sand financially for every single player and saying we're not going to go higher than this for any guy. And then you end up with this sort of roster of plan Bs, right? Which is, is that better or worse? I don't know. But that's where I think it becomes a really interesting analysis of like who's doing a good or a bad job as a GM, right? Because it's not just talent identification. It's, are you willing to go financially to a place where other people aren't? And if you're not, then what do you end up with? Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.